These are the lecture notes for Chapter 19 on taxonomy, systematics, and phylogeny. Okay, so in section 19.1, you need to make sure you understand what taxonomy actually is. So the definition of taxonomy, it's the branch of biology that identifies, names, and organizes biodiversity into related categories. So we're naming and classifying, basically, in taxonomy. Naming and classifying. So here we can see, let's look at these organisms. We can see this organism has been blown up 20,000 times its original size using an electron microscope. And it's an organism in the domain Archaea. Then we have these bacteria, which have been blown up 16,000 times their original size. Another electron microscope image or micrograph. And so Archaea is one of the three domains. Bacteria is another of the three domains. And then you can see the images in the second and the third row are from the domain Eukarya. So we have three domains, Archaea, bacteria, and the domain Eukarya. And so in the domain Eukarya, we have plants, fungi, and animals, as well as a group called the Protista. All right, so in taxonomy, we are going to use the rules for naming, for scientific naming. We're going to use the rules of binomial nomenclature. That means a two-part scientific name. So in the scientific name, the first word is the genus, the second word is the specific epithet. That two-part name refers to one species. So for example, this is the species name for a certain type of lily. It's called Lilium bulbiferum. And there's another one called Lilium canadense. So Lilium bulbiferum and Lilium canadense are both lilies. They're both in the same genus, which is the Lilium genus, but they're two different species because the species name and the scientific name are the same thing. So if I ask you what is the species name, you would say Lilium bulbiferum. If I were to ask you what is the specific epithet, you would just give me bulbiferum. And if I asked you what is the genus, you would say Lilium. Okay, so that's how that works. This is Carolus Linnaeus, who developed the system of scientific naming. And here's a picture of the two varieties of lilies. I think you recognize them as, gosh, what are they called? The orange ones that you see, they're the wild lilies that come up, and you see them so much, especially in the fall. They start coming out. I can't think of the name, but anyway, so this is our classification system, and we're going to start down here at the bottom. You need to learn the names of the classification groups in order. And they may be different from what you've learned in other science classes or other biology classes. They may look a little bit alike, but there may be some differences. So we have domain, supergroup, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, and species. Now, you may have learned starting with kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species, and you may have learned a sentence to help you remember that, such as King Philip's cousin ordered 5 great steaks. But we also need to now add domain and supergroup. So I had a sentence that didn't include supergroup, and it was for domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. And the sentence was, dumb kids prefer cookies over fresh green spinach. So I didn't really know another sentence. I couldn't find one like looking online. So the biggest thing for sentences to help you remember stuff is it a sentence that you can remember? So this one sounds kind of dumb, maybe, but dumb, stupid kids, okay? Dumb, stupid kids prefer cookies over fresh green spinach. Yeah, I don't have that written anywhere else. Dumb, stupid kids prefer cookies over fresh green spinach. So that can help you remember the classification groups in order, starting with the domain, which is the largest classification group, and the species, which is the smallest group and the most specific group. And we have, I don't want to go over that page. I don't think it's very helpful. So for classification groups, the higher the category, the more inclusive it is. In other words, the more organisms it includes. So the species is the most exclusive and the domain is the most inclusive. I'm going to skip that. Okay, now the three domain system. In this section, section 19.2, you're going to need to know the three domains, what their names are. You're going to need to know some examples of organisms within those domains and kind of a general description of those domains. So we have two domains that include organisms that are prokaryotic. That means they're single-celled and their cells do not have a nucleus. So they are the domain bacteria and the domain archaea. The domain bacteria consist of prokaryotic, meaning the cells don't have a nucleus, unicellular organisms, that means that all of the organisms in the domain bacteria are made of a single cell, and they reproduce asexually. Some examples are the cyanobacteria. These are photosynthetic bacteria, and heterotrophic bacteria, which are not photosynthetic bacteria. Some of these are important in our ecosystems, and some are parasites that cause disease. And then we move on to the domain archaea. If you were to just look at the archaea under a microscope, you might not think there's a lot of difference between them and the domain bacteria, but there's so many differences that they can't be grouped together. They actually have more in common with the domain eukarya than they do with the domain bacteria. So they are also prokaryotic unicellular organisms. So in that way, they're similar to the bacteria, prokaryotic unicellular organisms that reproduce asexually. But what makes them different is they live in extreme environments, like so hot that you wouldn't think anything could live there. Even temperatures hotter than boiling. Acidic environments that the acid would kill most other organisms, but these archaea can handle it. They thrive in very, very hot, acidic environments sometimes. And we use salt as a preservative. Salt kills most bacteria, but there are some archaea that can handle the salt. In fact, they love it. They love a salty environment. So these extreme environments, really, really hot, really cold, environments that would kill most other living things, some of the archaea can handle those environments. Okay, in the domain archaea, the plasma membrane and cell wall are chemically different from the bacterial cell wall. And that's a big reason they're so different that they just cannot be classified into the same group with the bacteria. And another thing that's different about the bacteria and the archaea is their ribosomal RNA nucleotide sequences. Ribosomal RNA, if you remember, is used to make ribosomes. So ribosomes that make proteins. Their nucleotide sequences are actually, the archaea are actually a lot more closely linked to the eukarya. So bottom line is they seem very similar, but they're actually very, very different. They're in two different domains, the bacteria and the archaea, but they're both prokaryotes. They're both single-celled. Then we have our domain eukarya, which are going to be probably more familiar to you. The domain eukarya are unicellular, and they're mostly multicellular, but there's a lot of unicellular too. So they can be both unicellular and multicellular organisms. They're going to have a nucleus in their cells because their cells are eukaryotic. And the four kingdoms within the domain eukarya are the Protista, Plantae, Fungi, and Animalia. The protists are difficult to classify and define, so we always refer to them within their supergroups. So if you go back to the classifications, remember you have domain, which can be archaea, bacteria, or eukarya, and then you have supergroup, and then kingdom. So for the eukarya, when we are talking about the protist, just the protist in the domain eukarya, we're going to classify them within a certain supergroup first before we go into kingdom. But then with plants, fungi, and animals, then we'll say kingdom, Plantae, and then we'll classify the plants into their phyla. Same with fungi and same with animals. Okay, so Protista are classified in supergroups. Fungi are mostly multicellular. They're saprotrophs. That means they're decomposers. Their cell walls contain chitin. Plants are photosynthetic, multicellular. And animals are multicellular. They're capable of movement. Motile means they're capable of movement at some stage of their life cycle, and they're heterotrophic, meaning that they have to consume their food. And here we have a table that shows you a comparison of the domain bacteria, the domain archaea, and the domain eukarya. Their cell walls, the bacteria contain peptidoglycan in their cell walls, and the archaea do not. Some eukarya do, some do not have cell walls. Bacteria and archaea don't have a nuclear envelope because they don't have a nucleus. Eukarya do have a nucleus. All three of them have ribosomes. All right, and then we're moving on to section 3, phylogeny, which is really dealing with the evolutionary history of a group. What is used in phylogeny to group organisms is characters from the fossil record, comparative anatomy, so comparing the structure and development of organisms, the sequence, structure, and function of the RNA and DNA molecules. These are all used to construct a phylogeny, okay, which is the evolutionary history of a group. Now, every time there's a branch in the phylogenetic tree, we call that a divergence from a common ancestor, and it represents an organism that gives rise to two or more new groups. Now, the traits that we use in phylogeny and the phylogenetic tree, the ancestral traits are present in all members of the group and the common ancestor. But derived traits are present in some members of the group, but not the common ancestor. These are the most important traits for clarifying the relationships. An opposable thumb not present in the common ancestor of all animals is an ancestral trait of primates.